Please start.
Okay, hello everyone. Apologies for the delay and welcome. We hope you had a nice and restful, enjoyable holiday break, and I'm very happy to kick off this session today. We are excited to have with us Elliott from ETH Zurich, one of the leading scholars working in the intersection of law, economics, and advanced empirical methods. Elliott will present today a paper in progress analyzing the content of US state laws over more than a century. And before giving him the floor, let me briefly introduce him. So Elliott is an associate professor of law, economics, and data science at ETH Zurich Center for Law and Economics. Before joining ETH, Elliott was assistant professor of economics at University of Warwick, and before that, a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton University's Center for the Study of Democratic Politics. He received a PhD in economics and JD from Columbia University, a BA in economics, government, and philosophy from University of Texas at Austin, and an LLM in international criminal law from the University of Amsterdam. Elliott, we are very happy that you are with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to join today to present on my work on using text as data in US legislation. I'm going to share screen and then I'll give an overview of what I'm going to talk about, and I'll pause for questions, and then I'll get into the details. This is a working title, so Nir and David were kind enough to allow me to present this new work. We don't have a public working paper draft yet, but for me, this is very interesting interesting time to present this work on policymaking in the American states, because we're adapting new AI methods to extract policies and summarize, and compare the policies by different states over a very long time period. This is new, and we're developing the methods as we go, and so it'll be great to get your feedback on what you think works and what could be improved. So for this type of webinar, I don't need to give as much background as usual, probably, but just to situate in the institutional context, we're looking at U.S. legislation at the state and federal level. There's three layers of federal, state, and local laws, and this is there's these old institutional foundations of this, where at the beginning of the US it was these 13 colonies that had a lot of power, and the federal government coming in having a national power over all the states was really controversial at the time, and it continues to be, and the one of the even at the very beginning, there's the idea that federal powers are few and defined, and state powers are numerous and definite. And so that's why part of the motivation of why we're looking at state policy. And there's these two dimensions of federalism that we're going to be looking at, where, the states, they can influence each other. There's this idea of decentralization leading to states being the laboratories of democracy, where they can experiment with different policies and learn from each other. But also vertical federalism, where through first you have the federal government, setting priorities and kind of influencing states, but also states can do experimentation and learn about policies, and the federal government can learn from that and make them national. And in this project, we're looking at these at some research questions around this issues of, is the federal government exerting a strong influence on states? And we can look at that through, there's kind of direct mandates and laws at the national level. There's like block grants, conditional funding, like Medicaid expansion is a recent one that made the news, regulatory templates that states can follow. And, from like to kind of frame it more from a modeling perspective, is state legislation complementary or substitutable with federal policymaking? And you can see that in like the states sometimes strengthening federal policies, sometimes trying to weaken it. And what is the role of partisanship in terms of like kind of Republican versus Democrat control of state governments in this diffusion process? So, how much does federal legislation shape state policy? Does alignment between state and federal party control amplify or dampen that effect? What are the determinants of state peer effects in policy making? So, when two states have the same policies, is it because they have the same political party, or is it because they're just regionally close to each other, or they have similar economies? Which states exert the greatest diffusion influence? And these are some of the kind of key research questions that we're going to be getting at in this project. So first, on the data and methods, we have a new corpus it's based on it's similar to the corpus that I have used in some previous papers, but it's been expanded up until 2020. It's about 2.5 million acts, so like state laws passed by state legislatures, which we've also added about 80,000 federal acts for the same time period. And we use AI, we're using a version of ChatGPT to extract the policy content from the legal texts. So that's something that I'm going to be spending a lot of time on today. And then we use a paragraph embedding technology, which takes short texts like these summaries of the policies and gives them a vector representation where the geometric location of the vector, the direction of the vector, encodes the important policy information, and then we can use that to compare different policies and cluster them into related areas. And I'm going to show you, because this is very new in terms of the methods, we also want to have some confidence in it, and so we're engaging in a number of validations of the policy extraction and clustering, and I hope to get some of your feedback on ways we can improve that. And then we're going to use these policy clusters to measure the determinants of legal diffusion. First, between individual states. So is it based on geography or having a similar economy or political partisanship? And then also between state and federal governments. And we're going to, at the end, I'm going to show you just an alternative approach based on political polarization, where I can show you that over time, if you look at a statute, can you guess, is that a Democrat or a Republican legislature that wrote that statute? And that's kind of a measure of political polarization in terms of how the alignment of policy priorities with partisan priorities. And so just some of our main findings. These are a bit preliminary because as I said, we're kind of working on a paper right now. But we find that the partisan control of state governments, so Democrat or Republican control, is increasingly predictive of policy making, policy allocation and policy diffusion between states since the 1990s. So in the last, 20, 30 years. And consistent with other research in the states and other areas of the U.S. government of this increasing kind of polarization, kind of like partisan, affiliation being this important policy determinant. And that's on top of kind of like, how similar the states are in terms of their region or their economy. But it's actually not that high by long run historical standards. So like in the earlier 1900s, it was just as high. So this is not a new situation. And we also can look at, when the federal government enacts policies, what happens in the states, and we show there's growing predictive power of the federal on the states. And this is contributing to a broad literature, which this is like a selective slide on this, on looking at the state laws as data, looking at policy diffusion and nationalization, looking at network approaches in economics, and also text as data methods in economics. And I think our main literature is on how what are the determinants of policy adoption in a historical perspective. So I wanted to just stop there. And David, Near, you guys tell me, would we have questions right now, or do I save those?
As you wish. We can stop here for a few questions. We can continue. Usually, we make a full talk and then we open up for questions. But it
Okay.
depends on you.
That's great. So my preference is to have questions during the talk if there are any. So like, maybe big questions you save for the end, but if there's any if there's any questions now clarifying where I'm going, this would be a good time. You can use the raise hand function. But also during like the methods part that I'm going to talk about in a second, if there's clarifying questions or kind of suggestions, I'd want to hear those during it. Um, it so I don't see any hands now, so I'm gonna continue. So our data is from the state session laws, and if you've seen, I have a few papers using this data, where it looks like this. So this is like the Assembly of the State of Colorado. This is January 1983. This is June 1983, and this is like an act that is allocating money for a reservoir. And so this is actually this is short. So this is the whole thing. This is the whole act right here. But it's also that's pretty typical. So like there are many acts that are just kind of like making this kind of small and this is what we're going to be extracting the policy content of and comparing across states. It gives the flow of newly enacted acts. So, I think when people think about laws, they think about the code. So like this established set of things that you can look up in a book and say what laws are in place. It's actually not that clean in practice. And, there's many laws like from, 100 years ago or 200 years ago that they actually might be in force, but they're actually not part of the code. But they've been enacted and maybe never repealed or amended. And it's actually pretty relatively recent, like 50 years ago or, less than 100 years ago, where they actually start trying to compile all of the existing laws that have been enacted and put them in one place so you can kind of look them up. Previously, you basically you had to look at the original bills. This actually makes it pretty messy where sometimes bills conflict with each other, things like this. In more recent years, they tried to make things more consistent. Um, but for us, we look at the flow. So you're introducing new laws over time, new policies over time, and that's what we're measuring. So we have about 2 million pages from Hainan Line from 1787, and a big part of the project was just to parse the text. There's OCR errors, so like the scanning errors, digitization errors, which we've done a lot to try to fix. This is what the data looks like just in terms of volume. So this is the number of acts per state and biennium. So but when we do the analysis by biennium rather than year because some states they only meet every other year, some state legislatures. And so you can imagine like a biennium would be like 2003 and 2004, for example, would be a biennium. And so you can see there's like 1,000 acts per state per biennium, so 500 per year. In like the 80s and 90s, it kind of went up a bit, and then it's kind of coming back down. The number of words per act was actually pretty constant for a long time, and then it's kind of doubled starting in the 1960s and 70s. That kind of makes sense, right? Because that's when they have like word processor technology coming in, kind of computers for writing up like just drafting laws became much cheaper. And so there's more of them and they became longer. This is the number of, in red here, the number of acts by the federal government. And you can see in black here, this is like this is the comparison to the state governments. For most of the time period, the federal government was doing more acts. They're actually not really substantially longer, but then in recent years, the federal government is doing fewer acts, but they're longer. And I'm gonna come back to that a little bit, how that plays a role in our analysis. And so that's that's the text data, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. The metadata that's going to go along with this text data includes geographic distance between the states, the cosine similarity between the census employment. So you can imagine, like we have like all the different occupations, and two states are economically similar if the occupation shares are similar. So cosine similarity, it's basically the Pearson correlation between the occupation shares between two states. And then for political similarity, the main one we use is just it's a binary variable that two states, both of the legislative chambers and the governor are the same party. So like two states, it's full Republican control or full Democrat control. Then they're similar along political margins. And so we actually have done that. We compare kind of Southern and Northern Democrats, and the results are not that sensitive to that. So in case you were wondering about that. So this is the main part of this project is to do policy extraction from legislation, and I'm going to try to this is a complex set of systems, and so I'm not going to give full detail. If anybody wants to try this, I can share you the slides in the paper, and I can provide some background on it. But this is like the kind of methods contribution of this project is to extract the main policy, do some adjustment on the policy extract to make them more comparable across states, convert them to vectors, produce clusters from those vectors, and we also have a topic classification. And again, I'm not going to read all of these word for word, but I can send you the slides if you're curious. But we start off with a text of the legislation, like those PDFs that I showed you earlier, and we say we have GPT-4o do the following: provide a brief phrase, approximately 5 words, describing the topic covered. Write a concise sentence not exceeding 40 words and utilizing the entire text, summarizing the policy being enacted, beginning with this policy ... Then we give an example of what the output should look like. This is prompting the AI to, it's basically having a research assistant that is very attentive and can do infinite work. So this is what the input looks like. It's like a kind of a processed version of the legislative text. And this is actually from a federal act. And it says, child exploitation prevention and interdiction. This policy requires the development of a national strategy for child exploitation prevention, increases resources for internet crimes against children task forces, and makes other improvements to aid law enforcement in investigating and prosecuting child predators. So this is I think kind of showing how we get this kind of like, and even when the OCR is really bad, like there's a lot of misspelling and stuff in the text, the AI does a very good job of extracting the policy. So like this is why the AI helps us so much. And when we first started this project, 5 years ago or something, so before we had AI, we were actually doing just like text similarity between the legislation itself. And that really didn't work very well because of the OCR errors is one of the main ones, but also there was so much important kind of formatting in terms of like the text of like just like the style of writing and stuff that the two states could have high similarity between their legislation just from the style and not from the policy content. And so this is what we want to do with this policy extraction. The second step is to anonymize the policies, and this is to try to make them more comparable across states. So, we're replacing like names and organizations and time periods with generic terms. We replace mentions of the state with just in the state, and then we can say in another specific state to refer to other states. Remove mentions of cities, and there should be no specific identifying information remaining. And the reason we do this is that if we just use the actual policy summaries, you get a California cluster or a Texas cluster or a 1984 cluster, and we wanted to make them more comparable. And this anonymization step works extremely well. So, here's the state from which the statute originates, Ohio. Here's the policy summary, railroad incorporation. This policy incorporates the 4 Mile Valley Road Company with the power to construct a railroad from Hamilton to the state line between Ohio and Indiana and to Richmond, Indiana. And we get the following fixed version. This policy incorporates a specific railroad company with the power to construct a railroad from a specific city to the state line between a specific state and another specific state and to another specific state city. That's exactly what we wanted, right? So then when you kind of see others, this is the 4 Mile Valley Railroad Company. Other states are going to have railroad companies, but they have different names. And so by doing this, we can make them more comparable. And we need it especially for doing the encoding of the policies. MPNet is, it's similar to in economics, you might have heard of word embeddings or word2vec or glove embeddings. Those are ways to take words or documents and put them in and make them into vectors. MPNet is just a more recent version of that. And it works at the paragraph level or sentence or paragraph level. And it's based on these more recent transformer architectures, which you might have heard about, which BERT and GPT are these transformers that they're kind of these efficient systems that read the whole document, and they account for like negation and things like this. Or at least they do so better than word embeddings. And at the end, we get a 768 dimensional vector for each act, which we can use to compare the acts. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like in practice now. So the first thing is we want to group the policies based on their vectors, and we use this unsupervised clustering algorithm called k-means clustering that it just takes these spheres. It identifies these spheres in the 768 dimensional space and puts the documents together based on which of the centroids of those spheres it's closest to. And so, this is how they look, like repeal of road laws versus repeal of charitable incorporation and road authorization. Those are, the same cluster. Domestic violence definitions, domestic violence shelter search warrants, bridge construction consent, bridge construction consent. So you can see this gives you an idea of like these clusters, they're not the same policy, like they're not doing exactly the same thing, but they're really close to each other. These are when I say that two states adopted laws on the same cluster, this is what I'm talking about. And so, we do some validation on that. I can answer questions if there are some. So how did we pick that there's 2,000 clusters? So first we kind of did that just based on a bit of kind of my intuition from being kind of familiar with the data set. And we started doing some robustness on it. But actually the thing that helps us in deciding that is this thing called silhouette score. It's a measure of how cohesive how well the clusters fit the data. And it's the average normalized distance difference of nearest cluster distance minus the intra-cluster distance. So it's like, how well do the points fit into their clusters that they're assigned to compared to like the nearest the nearest cluster, different cluster. And you can see that as you increase the number of clusters, the silhouette score it goes going up, but then around 2000 it levels out. And so that's why we picked 2048. And so here's just some descriptive statistics of what the data set looks like after clustering. So this is the number of statutes per cluster, about 1,200 of them. They span 90 years. That's important, right? That shows that on average, when a state, two states adopt a policy, even like 90 years away from each other. So these are like kind of long run. these are not just capturing like kind of fad policies that are only adopted in one decade. So there are these policy areas that the states legislate on over time. Number of states per cluster is 45 on average. That's great, right? Because that shows that we're capturing these policies that are broadly adopted. There's broad allocation across them, across states. It's not just like this is what California does, or this is what only the Democrat states do. Like their policy areas that all the states adopt on. And these other statistics are kind of showing the same thing, like that our anonymization step of like removing the identifying information allows us to get these policies that are adopted widely. You might be saying, okay, well, if all states are adopting these policies, that means they don't have any ideological content. And I'm gonna come back to that in a second. So these are just like some examples of what the policies that are being adopted. So airport authority governance, that makes sense, right? That starts in like the 1940s and 50s. Alcohol beverages regulation, also around the same time. Cemetery land conveyance, that starts all the way back in the 1850s. Municipal utilities policies from the late 1800s. County officers' duties, that's like very they've been doing that from the very beginning. Public building bidding requirements, kind of a similar deal. Like these are these old policies that they've been adopting them for a long time. So this just kind of shows you that it captures these things that have been around for a long time, but also things that are kind of responsive to technology. So then the final kind of AI thing we do is to assign kind of a broad topic to these policies this is the comparative agendas project. So we didn't come up with this list of policies. We just used one that's already used, like mostly in political science. And so Turnpike Road Company Organization is a transportation act. This is really subjective, actually. And if you look at many policies fit into multiple topics, this is not a central part of what we're doing, though. So that this is why we just took this existing set of topics. So government operations is the biggest one. But a problem with this is that there's actually no taxation topic in the comparative agendas project. And so it goes into government operations. So as a way to further validate the clusters, we have this kind of AI validation, and when we're settled on the final version, or the kind of close to final design, we're going to do human validations of all these. But the human validations is pretty expensive and kind of like in terms of time and logistics and money, and so we first try to find something that works well based on the AI validation, and then we do the human validation on top of that, which we haven't done yet. So here's the initial statement. Here's two additional statements, each identified by an ID. And so the snippets, one is from the same cluster and one is from a different cluster, but the same broad policy. Which statement discusses a policy that's most similar to the initial statement? And what we're hoping to see here is that the two policies from the same cluster are on the same policy, the two statutes extracts. And because if it says that the one in the other cluster is also on the same policy, then it means the clusters are not capturing any useful information. And this is what we found, that the same cluster is preferred 76% of the time. And there's diminishing returns to the increasing cluster count. So this gives us some additional kind of confidence that our results aren't driven by 2000 using 2000 clusters. Like it wouldn't make a big difference if we increased it to 2500 or reduced it to 1500. And the clusters are kind of like informative in the sense that it only happens 4.8% of the time that the policy in the other cluster is closer to the original policy. And sometimes they're the same, which is fine. But both of them are equally similar to the original policy. So this is just showing that the clusters are identifying important policy differences. that which we want to identify in the empirical analysis. So the second thing we did is, we wanted to know, uh, for a given cluster, do you have like a right wing and a left wing um, policy? So like, do you get like, uh, oh, in the same cluster, this policy, increased income taxes to 20%, and this cluster, this policy reduced income taxes to 0. And it turns out that in these state government policies, almost all of them are not that ideological. Like it's like the funding for the reservoir. Oh, we're going to build this railroad. We're going to regulate internet. It's this really kind of, practical stuff. And if you just ask, like, are they ideologically different? It always says no. So and you can't. Also, the other thing is, we tried to say, is this policy left wing, or is this policy right wing, or is this policy Republican, is this policy Democrat? And it just says no, or it just kind of says random things that, and actually, and we tried to do it. So we in the team, we tried to look at the policies and say, is this a Republican policy or not? And it was like it was really hard. It was very rarely possible to do that, because, is making this funding for this reservoir, is that Democrat or not? We don't know the baseline, right? So we, if humans can't do it, we can't really ask the AI to do it. And, if we can't do it, and we kind of like know more than most people about the situation, then there's not really a way to do that. So what we did instead is we just wanted to know, like, are the clusters, how common is it where, two policies in the same cluster, they're basically doing opposite things? Because that's the main thing we worry about, because we want to see, if two states adopt, our assumption is that when two states adopt policy in the same cluster, they're kind of going in the same policy direction, roughly. And so this is all we need, that they're not pursuing completely incoherent policy goals. So we took this sample of 10,000 of these policies. We took a random policy from the same cluster, and we asked GPT-4o if the policies pursue opposite or aligned policy goals. And so the prompt we use is, assess whether these statutes pursue opposite or aligned policy goals, considering the political ideologies and context rather than the policy topic itself. And we say, definitely opposing, probably aligned, definitely aligned. And we give an example. One statute increases environmental regulations while another relaxes such regulations. Um, and, um, for comparison, we did this for 10,000 policy pairs from different clusters. And what we were hoping is that, within cluster, they were at least more aligned than across clusters. And that's what we found. So, this is just the histogram of the answers to those things. For both the same cluster in blue, so two policies in the same cluster versus a pair of policies in different clusters, most of the time they're on probably aligned policy goals. This is what the AI tells us. And, I would say that from doing human annotation, I agree with this. And in terms of definitely aligned, the blue clusters, so that being in the same cluster it's pretty high still. So that's good for us, right? The clusters are identifying definitely aligned policy goals. But if you're in a different cluster, you're not definitely aligned, but you're probably aligned. And it's because it's like the policy goals are, I want the economy to run well. Like it's really this kind of like, just, like banal policy goals of, I want good government. Like they don't really have clear ideological things most of the time. Undetermined, it's pretty rare that in the same cluster you either, it's undetermined, and opposing policy goals is really rare. But so that's good for us. But in the sense of like being in the same cluster, you're not making opposing policy goals. But even when you're in a different cluster, it's really rare that you're on opposing policy goals, and that just shows that these state policies, they're not ideological, like of like banning abortion and stuff like that. It's really rare in the space of the millions of policies that we're looking at. Okay. And then this is just like kind of a validation. So, I mentioned this earlier, at least briefly, that we assume that one statute, like one legislative act, has one policy in it. And we did some validation of, again, with some AI checks on this. Like, we take the sample of the statutes and we ask the AI to extract multiple policies. And we found that in this is the share of policies that have more than one. This is the share of statutes that have more than one policy, and you can see it's pretty low. So it's like even when we're encouraging the AI to find multiple policies, it only finds them like less than 10% of the time. Is that a lot or not? I think we will eventually do the analysis, like assuming multiple policies, but just for now, I show this slide for now to indicate that our assumption that one statute is one policy is not totally crazy. So like it's correct, like at least 84% of the time. You can see that the number of policies for federal governments has gone up in like the 80s, and that's reflecting that that they're longer, right? And so they kind of have more policy content in them. Okay, that was the massive windup of measurement of all these policies in the states. And then now I'm going to show you a few empirical results, and I'm happy to answer questions. So we're going to be looking at the determinants of policy adoption in the following way. So lowercase n is our main outcome variable. It's a binary variable for a given biennium T. State S, biennium T, did that state at that time adopt a policy on cluster C? So remember, there's 50 states, 50. The main results I'm going to show you, there's like basically kind of like 160 years, so like 80 bienniums. So there's like 80 of those, but I'm also going to show it separately by decade. So like each of my regressions is going to have basically 5 bienniums in it because it's for a decade. State S, 50 states, and then 2048 clusters. And this exposure measure Z for dimension D is the weighted average policy adoptions on cluster C by similar states, according to dimension D during period capital T. And so it's like, usually that's like the last 10 years. And this is the formal definition. So we're for every state S, we sum over all the other states, S prime, summing over all of the bienniums in the last 10 years, T prime. Then it's, did that other state, S prime, adopt a policy on that cluster? So this is like, this push from the other state times how similar is my state S and T to S prime at T prime. So, in T prime, like 5 years ago, did that other state have the same political party and control government to me? Then this equals 1, and that's what I identify a push to the political exposure. So for political, we say if S and S prime are unified on the same party. And then for simplicity in our baseline, we just make geography and economics. They're also binarized. So it's the top third by similarity to make them kind of more comparable. And so that's the exposure measure. It's like our treatment variable. I mean, this is not causal, right? It's descriptive. But I'll tell you, we want to do something causal with this later. And so that's the exposure measure Z. And then our regression specification is we're modeling N as the outcome. So did state S adopt a policy on C at time T? Timed, and we put all 3 of these exposure measures in the regression together. So the political effect, the geographic effect, and the economic effect. And then we have these fixed effects. So this is a cluster fixed effect that adjusts for the overall differences across clusters and like, for a given decade, how much that cluster is legislated on. Then state fixed effect. This is like, some states legislate more than others. And then T is the biennium fixed effect. This is just like, within a biennium, is there more legislation? And this you see this that like, election years that there's more legislating, things like this. Here's the main descriptive result on partisanship. So this is the political exposure measure, this one. And so these estimates are the betas for the effect on of states with similar politics. How much do they shift my policy adoption across these clusters, these 2,000 clusters? And you can see that it's increasing recently. So this is similar. This is similar to like the Delavigna and Kim paper um, in like the 90s, 2010s. It's becoming more polarized, but it's not unusually so. So like, back in like the before the 1910s, 1920s, it was actually more polarized in the sense that like partisanship was even more predictive of policy adoption. So it shows that kind of previous work that like so the Delavigna and Kim paper, they start here and they basically find a similar pattern as this, but it shows that you actually needed to go back further in time to see if it's uniquely polarized. That's the partisanship one, and I can add on the same graph the other determinants. So green is geography, and the gray is economic. So you can see that geography is really important. So after adjusting for politics, and these we put them together, so they're kind of adjusting for each other. Adjusting for economy and politics, two states that are close to each other, they adopt similar policies. That makes sense, right? Like they have similar, climates and like minerals or whatever, and just like they also they probably they share a border, so they're interacting with each other. They have lawyers that work in the same communities, so it makes sense that being close to each other affects the legislation. But interestingly, it's been going down a lot. And that also makes sense, right? So like, in the 1880s, you know, you didn't have telephones, whatever. And as like the internet comes in, you get less and less. Geography is less and less important. The economy in gray also has always been important, kind of similar to the politics. This is actually just due to this is an artifact of the data from how the census and occupations are constructed. So we're probably just going to drop this year. Um, but we get a consistent picture after that like the econ two states that have similar economies adopt similar laws. That makes sense. We have a number of robustness specifications. So like, we do separate regressions by dimension. We vary the cluster count. We do some like normalization on the exposure measures. And we just have some other alternatives. In the newest version, I didn't update the slides yet. We have a structural model of policy adoption. So we actually are going to have some nice structural parameters that come out of this that are going to be more interpretable, and that come from this utility maximizing policy objective. But the kind of the overall results are pretty similar to these reduced swarm results. When we look at topics, so these are like these CAP topics, those are actually not really that polarized. So geography matters, right? Which makes sense. Like, if you're in like a rural state, you have more agricultural topics, for example. But partisanship doesn't matter in terms of the overall topics. It's really the within topic cluster policy adoption that matters. And then finally, we look at the influence of federal legislation, and we say, when the federal government, legislates on a policy, how often do states legislate on that policy? And we look at that over time as well, and that has been greatly increasing. So previously, in the early 1900s, if the federal government legislated on something, it actually had no effect on whether states did it. But now it's much more. And so this is kind of consistent with some like Dan Hopkins has these papers on the kind of nationalization of a state and local government. So I think that's a quite we can see that reflected quite strongly in the what policies states adopt on as well. But then, if this like we if anything, it's going down. So if the states legislate on something, the federal government is kind of less responsive to that than before. And then I think I mentioned that we have this alternative supervised learning approach. I can come back to this if there's questions, but basically we just ask, we train a machine learning model to predict, is a policy written by a Democrat legislature or a Republican legislature, and that we kind of get a similar picture. So for the Democrats and Republicans, it's going up recently, so it's kind of more you can guess more accurately, consistent with kind of more polarization of policies, but it was even higher earlier. Um, and just to conclude, and I can take some questions. We have this new methodology that we're developing to map state and federal laws into policy clusters so we can look at similarity in the determinants of policymaking between states and the federal government. And we find that partisanship is increasingly predictive. And our results are complementary to the Della Vigna and Kim paper because they only looked at the hand-coded policies, and we look at all of them, and we go 70 years back in time. And we show that the recent increase in polarization is not high by historical standards. We also show that the federal government is increasingly influential on states, but there's more to do there. You can see it's kind of like the first version that I showed you. And I already mentioned these throughout the talk, but we want to do some more human validations to make sure like the policy extractions and the summaries are working as like we want. And we want to just check that they work well over the long time period. We want to look at model legislation. We want to do more on disagreement between policies as well. And then we might put these in this paper or in next papers. Something that we're already working on is kind of looking at close elections. So kind of more of a regression discontinuity. Did two states barely get governors of the same party? What's the push effect of that on legislating? And then also we're interested in these technological developments like the telegraph, the railroad, telephone, and internet. That's my paper, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
So thank you very much, Elliott. It was both fascinating and inspiring. And I suggest since we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes maximum, so we can collect several questions and then you may answer a couple at a time.
Very
So
good.
great. Okay. So I see hand by Constantine. Constantine, please. And by myself as
That
well.
was just a clapping emoji because I really like that. But maybe if you put me on the spot anyway, I was kind of interested in terms of data collection because we're looking into the federal laws at the moment as well. And you mentioned the OCR errors. How frequently do you encounter these? Because we've been playing around with cleaning it with ChatGPT, which works quite well, but you can imagine gets kind of expensive if you have to pass everything through that. So how was your experience there?
Yeah, that's a challenge, and I think that the large language models like GPT, even the cheaper one like GPT Mini, is actually quite good at fixing the OCR errors, and so I think that putting all the federal laws through that is so the more recent years, it's all formatted well by the Library of Congress, so you don't have that problem. But for the historical ones, I think it's probably worth it to do that. if there is a cost issue, then I guess like there's, like Llama 3.1, I think is just as good at that. So you can have a downloaded version. Um, but depending on what you're doing with the data, it's worth it to do like you know, it adds hallucinations, so sometimes it misinterprets things. You have to be careful about that. But I think overall the data quality is improved, and I think that sampling some of the passages with high OCR errors, look at the original images, and then check that like how often like does the meaning significantly change. That's probably the best approach. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. This is super interesting. I think what you're doing here is really novel, but also really important in terms of connecting it back to like these established theoretical things that we've got. So from people like Dan. So Konstantine's already asked my data question, and so I'll kind of take it in a slightly different direction. So the first question is on these kind of what I would call vast policies. So you're obviously getting the idea of having kind of 5 words and then a short sentence. And I guess my question would be on these really vast policies, so something like the Inflation Reduction Act. I appreciate not a state policy, but I'm sure there are similar
Yep.
equivalents. Like, to what extent does that make sense? Like, to what extent is there real meaning in doing that? And then my kind of substantive question about your results is this kind of dimension that you talk about a few times of this idea of kind of good governance. And to what extent are your results showing a kind of decline in the prevalence of good governance? So with the results about partisanship, I can imagine could be seen through the lens of kind of the decline of this good governance. And I'm sure you're familiar with Jake Grumbach's excellent book, Laboratories Against Democracy. And that was the kind of thinking I was having when I saw that result. And when you see kind of appreciate, like you say, not by historical standards, but this re-emergence of polarization in the states. I was thinking of maybe there's some kind of connection here back to this decline of good governance and kind of moving apart on that one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for those points. This assumption of kind of like the one statute, one policy, I think that for these omnibus bills like the Inflation Reduction Act, it doesn't make any sense. It's a quite bad assumption for laws like that. I think that you know. Uh, adding trying to extract multiple policies from the acts adds like a layer of complexity that at least when we started this and kind of now we didn't want to do. The other issue is that when we started doing the policy extraction like a year ago or a year and a half ago, the context of the language models wasn't long enough to put the whole statute in. So that part is solved, this is not just us, but like um it's kind of well recognized that the language model performance decreases significantly when you add in very long documents. And so there's not like a perfect solution to it, at least without kind of like very significant engineering, that it may or may not be applicable over time. Like, and so, I hope there's a good way to do that in the future. But, for now, I think we're going to do it both ways and kind of have it as a robustness check. And I mean, like, I would like to work on that more, in kind of future work, because I think like that, like, in order for this technology to reach its potential, you need to be able to do that. And in the States, this is a problem as well, because like you have these budget bills in many states that are like they're just covering everything. And our approach just says, oh, this bill passes the budget. And so like that is really like, missing out on really important kind of policy granularity. So I appreciate that comment. We want to do that. The second point on kind of good governance and kind of like relating it to Jacob Grumbach's work, totally. So like that's helpful to hear, because we're wondering whether we can make that interpretation. And so I'm going to take that on board. I would like to. And it makes
That
sense.
that would be
Like,
how I would interpret that
yeah.
like kick back up would be the way I'd.
And it makes sense because, okay, well, differences based on the geography and economy, that makes sense. That's just like adapting to the local environment. But, on top of that, why would partisanship matter? Thanks for that. Yes, Ruth.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. And you've actually answered some of my questions. I did some work a few years ago on looking at amendments to legislation as it went through the legislature and automatically detecting what had changed. And I think if we had waited a few years for LLMs, it might have been easier, although what you say about long documents might come into that. So my question is, you did touch on it right at the end, but how you would look for the mechanism of this diffusion. Is there anything actually said at the time that specifically says that the legislators are drawing on examples from other states, or what? How are you going to look into the mechanism of the diffusion?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, we've thought of this. So, like and one is, um, there's different mechanisms for it, I guess. Like one that we could detect is just like copy pasting. There's this paper, like this Burgess et al. Paper, the legislative influence detector, and Hertel Fernandez has this kind of this research on this. And we when we were looking at the plain text of the legislation, that's actually one of the things we were going to focus on is kind of copy pasting. But now that we're doing these kind of policy extractions, we're kind of actually netting that out a little bit, or it's kind of combining that with other mechanisms. So I need to think carefully about kind of what is lost by like, not looking at the direct text. But the limitation of the direct text is that, like, the copy pasting is that with the OCR errors, it really makes that hard to do. So like the Burgess et al. They could do that in recent years because the text was digitized very high with high quality, and so you could detect like when they were like using these model bills and things like that. And so for our long run historical perspective, it's harder for us to do that. Um, I think that, like, looking for like maybe like I don't know if there's like news articles about this, or maybe they even mention that like in the motivation or in the preamble, like, oh, other states have had success with this. That I admit we haven't looked at that. So one thing we don't have is that you don't have like the congressional record where you have like the parliamentary discussions. We only have that for relatively recent years. At least for recent years, we could actually look at that, how they were discussed, like kind of where does the policy come from. That would actually be quite illuminating. Well, I'll look into that. But there's more limitations if we're talking about kind of 100 years ago. But it could be like in the newspapers they're discussing this. So, do you have another thought on that, like a source in mind where they would talk about this? Or
Well, I was thinking on the UK context, you would look at Hansard, but there's millions of words there, so
well,
it.
yeah. So in the U.S. in the federal level, you have the congressional record, which is like the American version of the Hansard, but we don't have those in the States,
Yeah.
at least not until relatively recently. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I will add my own, and my question is that you're validating each step along the way, and given that, I'm curious about the overall validation of the pipeline. So even with a step-by-step validation, do you have any worries about accumulating errors along the way, and is there any way to handle it?
Yeah, that's a big challenge for us. I mean, I think there's not an easy way to validate the whole pipeline, even though, at least like in terms of like, if we want to put some kind of statistical test on like how the errors are affecting our, like, adding bias or adding affecting the standard errors, then we would need that. So we need some kind of ground truth policy allocation variable for the states, which I don't think we will have. At least like it's not feasible really. So like because we can't annotate the final product really. So like and so uh uh this is like an active research area. So it's something we're gonna track and kind of and see what we can do. Um, but I think that if we tried to like, if we said, okay, well, you know, let's say there's like 5% error at each stage, then at the end, it's just total. It's like really noisy after like five steps or whatever. So, I think, we're using it as an outcome well, yeah, but and we're using it as an outcome and a treatment. So like it's actually it's not great. You know, um, but on the other hand, the previous work by Delavigna and Kim, even hand annotating the laws has errors in it, right? So even like kind of like, I mean, if it forces you to think about kind of measurement in general, GDP is there's like a model there, right? There's error, and so and we don't, there's no ground truth that we can compare that. So I think there's like some bigger questions in kind of like social science that are raised by that. Um, and we think that we're extracting something meaningful, and so if we can validate each of those steps, then I think that the resulting empirical estimates, you'd want to take them with a grain of salt as like kind of elasticities that you would set policy based on. But I think that we can get it at a direction, like directions of effects, if not magnitudes. Yeah, David.
Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. You have excellent and mind-blowing project, and I admire what you are doing, and consistency, professionalism. Much of it comes from the discipline of economics, where you partly belong, and some of it's probably US based education and the ability to put law and economics and to some extent political science together. So I really appreciate what you are doing. It's innovative. But I have maybe a difficult question for you. I don't know how difficult. What is, and it deals with what can we do with what we learned from you? Meaning, you have an infrastructure of textual data set, and you have new ways of analyzing it. But the theoretical value can be probably much broader. And as a data scientist and as somebody that invested so much in these techniques and data collection, the question is, what can be done more or faster to ask new questions and to get new answers? So what is the broader implication of what you are showing us here?
Yeah, so I can read that in two ways. So one, I guess like from a substantive perspective of like this specific domain, I think you can think of it as having some research assistants that have unlimited time, and so we can actually we can read the content of those laws in a way that we can use AI to do that in a way that would have been impossible before. It would just be infeasible. And so my hope is that any research that's on both policy as an outcome or policy as a treatment, we can do that in a much more detailed and granular way than before, arbitrarily granular. I mean, it's not like AI is going to automate all of this, but if you can articulate a question about legislative texts that gives like a consistent answer in the sense that humans would agree on the answer if they had unlimited time, then AI can do that for us. And so if you want to look in a historical corpus and say, okay, get all of the property taxes changes, his state history, give me all the income tax exemptions. If it's something that you can articulate and humans would be able to convert it to a data set, then the AI would be able to do that. And so I think that, like, sort of understanding, the information about policy that's currently kind of locked up in text. I think that technology is very useful. The way that we're using it is pretty inductive, right? It's kind of like, kind of taking a pretty broad mapping, kind of like getting the lay of the landscape. Whether that's like the best or kind of like most impactful first research question, I'm not so sure. I'm interested in that sort of, like kind of like these big picture kind of determinants of policy diffusion and adoption. But in terms of like, is that going to be the most impactful thing that we learn about kind of the state lawmaking process from this technology? Probably not. For this broader question, okay, what can we learn from these methods in general, kind of as a methodological question? I think I would kind of give a similar answer like that. You can imagine that previously what social scientists have done is we have different sensing technologies, different measurement technologies. Some of it's like from a government accounts or like kind of like, from GDP or kind of ComScore things, like measuring, getting the tax rates from different like accounting data sets. But, getting the tax rate, historical tax rate, the previous way of doing that is you'd look that up in the statutes, right? Like the either lawyers would do it or economists would do it directly. You'd look at the laws and you say, okay, well, the death penalty was abolished in this year, and this is the effect on the crime rates. And you get those crime rates from different data sets. And so this methodology is a way to make those processes faster. And so it's making it faster in a way that I think we're still kind of internalizing as social scientists, like what are the new things that can be done. And social science is slow. Like, when we started, I mentioned we started this project even before you had GPT and AI and things like that. And then, what can be done with the newer reasoning models like O1, O2, O1, O3, O4 is at another level of kind of like, intelligence in the sense of kind of data processing in a reliable way. And so, what's going to be possible a year from now, uh, you know, uh, I can speculate on that, but it might take too much time. But just to say that I think like as a measurement technology from text, I think that this is as good as what human RAs could do or better. And so any research that we had before that relied on human RAs, then we can do it at more scale. With language models. That being said, we're not at the point where we can just rely on these things without further human checks. And I don't think we'll ever be at that point. I think we always like there's always going to be some kind of human evaluation that happens for data quality.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elliott, for being with us today, for your presentation, for the last points as well. We're very happy for it. And yeah, we'll meet soon in other webinar sessions. We will know them by email. And thank you again. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. And
yeah, I will just say that we have a serious web page on the metrics of regulation, and also YouTube channel. Subscribe, join us, and watch this video again and other video in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Bye, everyone.
everybody.